Hi, welcome to My Counselor Live. I'm Tori, and I am so excited that you are all here joining us, whether you're live, watching the replay. We're so happy you're here, and we're so excited to answer your questions and get to know you better. I'm really excited, you guys, because we get to have another counselor on the show today. So, typically we have our founder, Josh Spurlock, but we are welcoming Lacey Wallace today. Lacey is a counselor here at MyCounselor.Online, specializing in just so many relational things, marriage counseling, sex therapy. And Lacey, I'm just super excited to get your insight and just to get to know you better and let everyone else get to know you better, because you're just a great asset to our team. So I just would love it if we could start by you kind of introducing yourself to the viewers and tell them a bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, well, it's so nice to be here and sit with you, Victoria. I work with MyCounselor.Online. I'm in the Springfield office, so I am located in Missouri. I have been on the team for about 3.5 years, a little over that. Very much enjoy, where I work and who I get to work with. That's something that I feel incredibly blessed by. I have a very large family, so that's one thing that could note about myself. My husband and I have been married for 23 years, and we have 6 children and 7 grandchildren. And so we are
I
a
love
Wallace
that.
party of 18. So we make a commotion wherever we go. But I just sent my babies, our final 2, off for their first day of their senior year today. So we are kind of out of that, raising of children stage and on into like enjoying our adult children, enjoying our grandchildren. And so that's just a little bit about me. My husband and I, we have been in full-time occupational ministry. So we've been pastoring since 2004. So we currently are lead pastors at a church plant that we just love, called Cross Point Church in Ava, Missouri. And so so that's something that's unique about us. We are bivocational, so I do this, and my husband also gets to pastor a company himself. So he works. Honestly, all of our pastors and leaders within our church are bivocational, and so it's just kind of just a culture that we really love and value in that. And
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd
so,
love to know how you got involved in ministry, because obviously you have such experience doing it and y'all have been doing it so long. So where did that desire to be in ministry kind of come from?
yeah. So you hear this all the time. When, I was growing up, my family had me in church every time the doors were open. Same thing with my husband. His grandpa was his pastor. And so we both had that foundation. And so when we got married, we just knew how we wanted to raise our family together. And there's gifts and talents that my husband has. He is a phenomenal musician and an excellent speaker. And so you could just see, God's hand on him. Me, I'm the kind of person that doesn't want to be noticed, that really does better in small crowds, that is really nervous today, thinking of all the people that might be watching me and who might watch me after. I'm not as well spoken in front of a large group, but we really work well together. And so, as we started working within the church, we've worked in youth, we've worked in kids, we've worked in the music, and we've worked in every area. Where I noticed that I started to really flourish and shine was in this one-on-one, sitting with couples, working with individuals. And so so we've just kind of really figured out what it is that we are both good at within the ministry, and really encouraged and supported one another as we've grown over the last, I don't know, was that 16 years in full-time ministry, but we really started in lay ministry in 99. So, over 2 decades working within
Wow.
the
Yeah.
church.
Well, and I love the way that you guys complement each other, because I think that just shows kind of the God ordained part of this, that, you kind of thrive with those smaller groups and more one-on-one conversations. And he's great with big groups and a lot of people. And, I think that's a really cool thing that y'all bring as a couple when you're doing ministry together, is y'all complement in 2 different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. We've always pastored together. wherever we've been, whatever we've done, that's something that we very much work as a team. So I
Yeah.
very much value that.
Awesome. That's
Yeah.
so great. And you've got 6 kiddos. I love that. I am actually the oldest of 6. And my parents have been married 25 years. So kind of similar. And I loved growing up in a big family. It was never a dull moment. Our ages range from like 15 years is the gap between me and my youngest brother. So there was never a dull moment. We always had a baby running around, and I miss it. Sometimes I really do. It's very quiet in a house with like just me and my husband now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's crazy. And if my children aren't living in my house, they all live within about a 5-mile radius. And so we're able to get together often. And,
All of them do.
uh-huh.
That is such a
Yeah,
blessing.
yeah, it is. It very much
Wow.
is.
Yes. And all the grandkids that you get to just watch grow up. How
Mm-hmm.
awesome.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
we
I
had
love that.
our little Wallace family chit chat was flooded with the, pictures the first day of school today. So all of our 5 of our 7 grandkids went back to school today. So
Yes. Oh my goodness. Well,
we
that
actually
is
got to take
just,
them shopping. Ron and I, my husband and I we took them shopping the other day. We braved that with our 2 oldest kids and the 5 grandkids, shoe shopping and clothes
oh
shopping
my
and
goodness.
supply
That's a
shopping.
lot of kids.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that kids really don't like shoe shopping. That's probably like the least liked thing that you could shop for with kids, I feel like.
I think our grandkids really enjoyed it. We let them pick out exactly what they wanted. My kids were like, you always had to have your idea and what you wanted us to have. But like the grandkids were like, absolutely, you want that shoe? Go for it. You can
Oh
have
my
it.
goodness. I bet it's so funny for your kids to see the way that you treat the grandkids now, because it's probably so, I mean, it's a totally different relationship. You can spoil your grandkids, but you don't want to spoil your kids?
Yeah. Yes. I hear all
Oh,
the time,
wow.
you wouldn't have let me got away with that. Yeah, well,
They're
they're
like
your
jealous of their
child.
own
That's my
children.
grandchild.
Oh, I love that. And I love, love, love that they all live so close. I grew up in a military family and we never got to be close to our grandparents. And, I definitely look back and wish that we had lived closer. And, I'm so glad that they live close. And I'm sure that you don't take that for granted at all.
No, we very much love that. We love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And you have been with MCO for like 3 years now, going strong. Everyone loves you and loves having you on the team. And I know that you have just spoken into so many relationships, so many individual people and marriages. And obviously, you have super extensive experience in ministry as well. So that is something super unique, I think, that you bring to the table as a counselor, is just your knowledge of ministry, of the word, of church and things like that. And you actually recently wrote an article kind of addressing the church and the way that the church has historically and currently approached sexuality. This article is called Break the Silence. And you just wrote this really eloquent article. And I would just love to chat with you about how this article came about and why you decided to write it.
Mhm. Well, as I have been pursuing my career professionally, working with couples, sitting down with couples, more and more just I would sit with couples that struggled sexually, just rarely do I have a couple that come in marital conflict. Is there not an issue around the sexual part of their relationship? And so as I grew my education around that, just kind of really recognizing just where the church could be more helpful. And so I don't want this article to be perceived as me blaming or accusing or pointing my finger at the church, but to just, we can be helpful. We can be more helpful than what we have been historically. And, to be able to really recognize that there are hurting people within our church. And I don't really believe that the church is silent, to be hateful or to be mean around this, or I really do think it's fear of being misunderstood or not knowing all of the answers, or really because it's so broad. There's so many sexual struggles that we have. And so I think it's just kind of fear that the church hasn't addressed all of these. But so as I've grown in my profession and sitting with couples and grown in my education, I really have felt this, this catch in my spirit of, well, you probably you probably ought to be a part of that change, right? Like, you have this experience within the church and the years of ministry, and now you have this education and you're seeing all of the wounds. And so, who better in these regards than somebody that has both of that. But it's scary. It's really scary to be sitting here with this information. I compared it to Esther, and as she, that she was created for this time, for such a time as this, but it required tremendous bravery on her part as she approached the king to plea for the lives of her people. I was actually had a dream one night, and the next day this article was birthed. But I had a dream one night that I was standing in front of the congregation to where I really feel like my husband and I were born, when we chose as adults to really dedicate and commit our lives to Christ and to the ministry. I had a dream that I was standing in front of this church talking to the congregation about sex. And so very specific to, that was my beginning. That church was my beginning. And so I really felt like this is your start. Not necessarily that you should go to that exact church and, talk about sex in that church, but I would if they wanted me to, but that this is the beginning. This is that start here again. And so I woke up that morning, and actually I think it was the middle of the night. I got up and just started writing this article as kind of just the beginning. I feel like this is the beginning of, being able to understand, helping pastors and leaders within the church to be able to understand more about these sexual struggles and issues and trauma and how they can be more helpful. So that's
Yeah,
kind of how this
absolutely.
article was birthed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, I see myself in the story of the church, struggling to address and to handle and understand sexuality. And I know that a lot of people do. I think a majority of people in the church have questions about sex and sexuality that aren't being answered by the church. And so they're being answered elsewhere, and sometimes not in good places, and you talk about in your article, God's the designer of sex. If anyone should be talking about it and celebrating it, it should be his people, and so I think that absolutely I see, Esther in this, as just taking that courageous first step of saying, hey, we have a problem. Like, people are being hurt because we're not talking about this. You mentioned fear being a reason that the church might be avoiding this conversation. What specifically would you say that they're afraid of?
Well, I think that it is a topic that hasn't been talked about. And so are you going to be the first person? Are you going to be the, and it's that, that fear being misunderstood or being misportrayed or not having all of the information, or, Victoria, it could be that the leaders or the pastors, they're struggling themselves with, sexual struggles or trauma or addiction or whatever. And so, because, I know, from experience that just because you are leading a church does not mean that you are free of all of that, free of struggle, free of past experiences, still being very relevant in your life. That I feel like there are a lot of people leading our church that would fall in this category of, having sexual struggles. And so I think that's what I believe keeps the church silent.
Yeah. What do you think about it being too late? Do you think that it's beyond repair? It's been, of course, just historically, this is the way that it's always been, or felt like it's always been. How do we repair this? Is it even possible to heal from this issue in the church?
Yeah, I think that Jesus' example to us and his gift of salvation tells us that nothing is beyond repair, right? Nothing is
Amen. Yeah.
beyond, you know, redeeming, and this is not either. And so I think that it just takes a first step and another step. And, as I watch my couples be able to engage in a safe place with strong biblical foundation around issues around sexuality, I know it's not impossible. And so, because I am not apart from the church, when I'm sitting in my counseling sessions within my office or here online, like I am the church
Yeah.
in that session right there. And so I'm just a small part of that. And so how can we broaden that and expand that, move that, with into more people receiving therapy, because the churches know where to send them, and also the church educating themselves to where they can provide education and answer some questions around some topics that might not need professional care or assistance in. And so I think it is just these are our next steps, is just figuring out how to educate and how to grow in that understanding.
Yeah, you mentioned a few steps in your article moving forward, how to address this, how to repair it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ones that you mentioned is educating yourself,
Mm-hmm.
educating ourselves as the church.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, what are some practical ways to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. So pastors and leaders being able to reach out to, people that dedicate their life to, knowing this and teaching this and understanding the sexual struggles with that biblical faith foundation. Because there is a difference between secular sex therapy and Christian sex therapy. There's a big difference in that, in what you read even. And so there, leaders and pastors really educating themselves, knowing what resources as far as people or books or things like that, ministers and leaders doing their own work around sexual issues within their life. I think that from that first beginning with Ron and I in ministry, my husband walked in on our pastor one Sunday morning really, really early, as he was going to help prepare for Sunday morning. And our pastor walked out of the bathroom carrying the toilet brush, was going from one bathroom to the next bathroom. And my husband's like, "Sir, what are you doing?" And he said, if I can't clean the toilets, I have no business behind the pulpit. And that's just something that has really stuck with us as far as our leading throughout the years. How can we expect somebody in the church to do what we aren't willing to do ourselves? And so, really just pastors and leaders, getting the help that they might need around sexual struggles, whether it be within their marriage or with addiction or whatever that might look like. I think that will be a huge catalyst to change, and that vulnerability and in leading, because much is required of our pastors and our leaders in that regard. My husband and I sought marriage therapy about 10 years in, and it is something that we very frequent from the pulpit. Ron talks about it all the time, that what I do and what we did in that. And his reservation of, I'm the pastor, I give the therapy, I give the counsel, I don't receive the counsel, right? And that is unfortunately a lot of the culture within the church, that it's not safe for pastors or leaders to be vulnerable around a struggle, right? And so just really opening up that safety for them to do their work, knowing where to go to do that, so that they can then lead their church on where to go to do their work, or help them provide that. And I think it's really important too that our pastors know where their limits are. So they recognize, talking about boundaries with sexual trauma, just really recognizing that if you have somebody that comes to you, that makes themselves vulnerable to you, that discloses sexual trauma, just really recognizing your boundaries in that, and like your limitations, and knowing where to send them for help, knowing where you can take them to receive the kind of really specific care that they need to help through that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if of course there's not like a a book on, exactly what not to respond to or what is too far or whatever. But, would you just recommend, being discerning, through prayer
Mhm.
in those moments? Like, what's your recommendation
Mhm.
as someone who works in
Mhm.
ministry?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as a therapist within my profession, I consult often. I might think I know what to do with a particular case or a particular issue, or I might think I might be in over my head. Well, I'm reaching out. I'm reaching out to one of my colleagues, one of my coworkers, somebody within my field to say, hey, you know, is this beyond me? Is this, or, do I have this? And so I think with pastors, that's the same thing, not being alone in that decision. If this is something that you don't have a lot of experience in, or, you don't know a lot about, reach out to somebody, and, have that accountability there, to just recognize that, um, we do have our limits in that position. There are limitations that we have, and knowing who, having those resources in play, knowing who that we can refer to
Mm.
at
Yeah,
that
yeah,
point.
that's good. I think the thing that struck me most about your article, Break the Silence, was just reading it and seeing myself in the story, seeing myself as, a 14, 15-year-old girl who felt very unable to talk about this and nervous for what people might say or what people might think,
Mhm,
people in leadership even. And,
mhm,
I'm sure that a lot of people who read the article, see themselves in that as well. So my last question would just be, what would you, as both a counselor and a minister, say to someone who has been wounded by the church in this way, as they are working through their sexuality or their sexual issues?
mhm. Yeah, I think it's really important that, we not make excuses or minimize the pain that they have, the the wounds that you have. They're very real to you. They're very real to, the people that are sitting within the congregation still, or aren't in church, or, come to a therapist for help. We're not going to make excuses or minimize that at all. We're going to very much recognize and understand that their experience was hard, was difficult in that. Um, I think that, them recognizing and understanding that, um, you know, that it can be healed, and their relationship with the church doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to end there, right? And I do think that it isn't out of vengefulness that the church doesn't talk about it, or I really do believe that it's out of fear. And so,
Mm.
really being able to kind of talk through that and understand that. And um, so it's really difficult, as I sit with so many couples that, received the message of, don't do this, don't do that, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. And then when they get married, all of a sudden it's supposed to be right, and they're supposed to crave it, or,
Mm.
petition for it often. So recognizing there was a gap in that. There was a gap for you in that. The struggles that you were having, or you as a 14-year-old thought they were struggles, thought they were wrong, thought they were, you know, um, sinful, right? But in all actuality, they were perfectly natural and normal and
Mm.
healthy, and you just needed somebody to come alongside of you to help you steward those, to help you recognize and understand and value your sexuality and what God intended for it. And so,
Mhm.
so we get to do that now. So we can't take a big pink eraser and erase your experience, or erase, others' experiences in that. But we definitely can give them what would have been really valuable back then. We can give that to them now, and really help to lean in and educate. And so, I like to think that, um, yes, it was the church and the silence that hurt them. But when we grow, it can also be the church that heals them in that,
Mm.
as we grow and learn, to be able to be bold in these conversations.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. I think of even just what you said earlier, when you said, there's always hope. There's always hope for healing and restoration.
Mhm,
As long as we can, look back and see that
mhm,
Jesus still chose us and he still came and we still receive salvation, there is hope for the church to change the way that they approach these issues, and for people watching who maybe have been hurt to be healed, and to experience something new and new life in their church. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love
Yeah. And
that.
I would just love to see like this spark pastors just the curiosity to reach out to me or other members of our team to, to have, so because I have in my mind, like I have my list of authors that I'm like, you can't read anything bad from these authors, these faith-based Christian authors around sexual pain and issues, or desire discrepancy issues, or sexual trauma issues, or all of that. So, and they're not just clinicians readings, they're for public consumption. And so, I would love to be able to share, with pastors and leaders these books, these references, be able to, spend some time if they want me or somebody like me to come in and share, and to hear what we have to say, whether it be to them or to their church, right? And so I would just love to see conversation started, curiosity, and churches really start to grapple with this. Can we do this? Can we, can I, if as a pastor, if God lays up on your heart a message about sexuality, gosh, can I be bold enough to step into that and preach that? It's a big deal. Like, so I don't minimize that at all. That is a big deal, right? And so just kind of really opening ourselves as Christian therapists, as Christian sex therapists, to be able to provide that resource to them. So there is a lifeline, right?
Yeah, no,
That's my
that's
hope. That's my hope for this article. Not that the church would feel shamed about this or blamed in this, but the church would be hopeful in this, and that there is a way that we can redeem this. There is a way that we can, I said this in my article, that I really believe that there are more people within our church that struggle sexually than are sexually healthy. I would say it's a 3/4 that aren't sexually healthy, and a fourth that are, if not maybe even more. And just reading through the different issues, in that, and recognizing the betrayal and the pornography, and the medications, or the lifespan, because our sexual intimacy changes so much through the lifespan, and it doesn't have to stop, but we do have to talk through it and change it. So there's just so much, down to our teens and our singles. And there's,
yeah.
the church has such a, we have so many people, and we have such a platform of influence, that so many could be helped if through this, through beginning conversations and pointing people in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for being brave and writing that article. And to people who are leaders in the church, people who have questions, there are resources, and there are counselors here at MyCounselor.Online that want to sit down with you and tell you, how we can sort of repair this and work through this together. You're not, alone trying to figure this out. Education, it doesn't have to be like a big burden for you. We want to help, and we want to provide resources for you, to ultimately heal your church and heal the people that are there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, that's so great. And I just loved getting to read your article, hear what you had to say. So super excited to just keep this going. Guys, if you're just now hopping on to My Counselor Live, welcome. We're so happy you're here. I'm Tori, and I am sitting down today with one of our counselors, Lacey Wallace, just talking through some different things. And the next thing I'd love to talk about is just kind of a trending topic. So when I say a trending topic, I really just mean, this is something that a lot of people are Googling, a lot of people are asking about right now. And the one that I noticed and wanted to talk with you about is trauma triggers. Of course, you have a lot of experience with sex therapy and sexual trauma and things like that. And so I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts on trauma triggers. What are they? How can we practically work through them? So if you, just as a counselor, could kind of talk through this, expand on this idea a bit, I would love that.
Yeah. Yes, it is. It is a really worthwhile thing to discuss and talk through. And so many people, have experienced trauma and, and haven't necessarily walked through it or processed it or don't know how to do that or where to do that, but recognize they definitely are impacted by that through what people would call a trigger in that regard. And so really understanding what's happening to you in that moment, whether it is something that you hear or something you see or an experience that you're in, that you notice yourself be heightened, right? That you notice what you would call your body is being triggered or your thoughts are being triggered. And really just understanding it's kind of like we're being hijacked in that moment from a past experience. And so our bodies, and I think really it's important that we understand that it's not just what you're thinking, it's what's actually happening within your body. So recognizing that, when we become hijacked by that past experience, whether it be something we hear or see or experience, that there is something that is going on with you physiologically. Your nervous system has been impacted. That sympathetic nervous system is kind of like the gas to that. So your breathing quickens, you notice your pulse is racing, you might start sweating, so I think it's just recognizing that, and being aware of what's going on in your body and working out. So how can I focus on my body at this point and calm it down? So what can I do as far as, being mindful and being gracious with myself in this moment? If you are a couple, like if you are married and, experiencing this trauma together, for your spouse to know what they can do to help you in that moment. How can they be helpful? What can they say? What's not helpful for them to say in those moments? Really figuring out how to understand yourself and understand your body, and to activate that, the brakes to that, which is the parasympathetic part of that. But to understand that when that sympathetic nervous system is engaged, when the gas is pushed, your body is flooded with adrenaline and hormones and like all kinds of stuff in that. And it's just, we can't just wish it away at that moment. We can't just say, okay, I want to stop now. We actually have to engage in calming and soothing our body in that moment to quiet that. And so being able to recognize and understand that we are presently safe, right? That was in the past. We are being hijacked from something that's in the past. To be able to calm. Some people have a smell that really calms and soothes them, or a taste or a texture of something. So being able to engage in that breathing and whatever it is that they need, because once we can calm down, we begin to start having a clearer mind where we can be able to think and problem solve and recognize that we can distinguish past from present in those moments, once we begin to learn how to calm ourselves. And so I think that's really, really, really important to understand and to learn, what situations might have triggered us in the past, be prepared, for that to happen, to kind of go on a little bit of the offense instead of simply being defending what's coming onto us at that moment, having to be reactive to that, but maybe moving into, this situation last time was really difficult for me. How can I prepare myself? How can I calm my body going into that? I have a lot of my clients, really practice their calming, their breathing in times that they're not triggered. So moving into being able to be mindful in your breathing throughout the day when you're not triggered will be helpful, because you'll be like, oh, this is relaxing. Like when you are triggered and you engage in that, oh, I remember this. Your body remembers it. It remembers that it calms. It remembers that you're okay. And so I usually, kind of help my clients walk through and understand those things that they can do to help prevent, right? And so once we are able to calm ourselves, just knowing when and where to reach out to be able to process through those, because we can't just wish them away. If we have trauma, if we've got things in our past that are significant, and we need to be able to find a safe place to be able to talk about them. And because ultimately in those moments when you are feeling triggered, our goal is to help you to be able to communicate what you need, right? What do you need? What's going on with you? To be able to know boundaries, to be able to communicate what it is that's, that they're fearful of, what it is that they want. And so to not necessarily be paralyzed in that moment, but to be able to engage and trust yourself and be vulnerable.
Yeah, I think the physiological, biological part of all of that is what's most interesting to me, just the way that God wired our minds to, um, be really afraid of trauma and afraid, of that stuff. Our body has like a physical reaction
Yeah,
when there's fear.
yeah. Yeah, we're hardwired to avoid things that are painful or harmful. And
Mm.
so we're hardwired into, fighting or fleeing from those things that are, physically dangerous to us or harmful to us. And so, and the thing of it is our bodies don't necessarily know, if I've experienced this in the past and I'm experiencing this now, even though the now might be safe, it's still being reactive
Mm.
to what happened in the past. And
So it's
so
almost like it,
there
it
needs
thinks
to be
it's
a healing.
protecting you,
Oh
but
yes. Oh yes.
it thinks it's protecting you, but
Yes.
it's actually maybe making things escalate.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, because we can feel anxiety in good things as well, but it's our body remembers.
Hmm.
Our bodies remember, and so that's really very important that we understand that it wasn't just it's not just your thoughts. It is it's your whole body that it's experiencing this. And so we can't just attack our thoughts. We can't just try to minimize our thoughts or take our thoughts captive at that moment. That
Hmm.
that's good too, but we have to incorporate the calming and the safety that we need within our bodies too, to understand how we can decrease that adrenaline and the cortisol and that, like how can we decrease that to where we can know that we're safe and be able to be calm and think calmer and to really care well for ourselves in that moment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, definitely, my heart goes out to anyone, who might be watching this, right now or watching the replay who has experienced any kind of trauma and, wrestles through those triggers. But Lacey, I just really appreciate your intentionality in answering that question and even giving just the practical tips of watching your breathing and mindfulness to kind of calm your body down when it starts to be triggered like that.
Mhm. Yeah. And the more that they engage in that, the more they can trust themselves. And so it might be that they're working with their therapist or, they're working with their spouse to be able to, to be confident that they can. I had a spouse the other day when they logged in and he said, I have to brag on my wife. She was able to, and he just went into this, like she was able to calm herself, and what used to take her 30 minutes took her 5 minutes. And, just really, so precious to hear a husband, brag on his wife about that and, allow her to take that in. And, because we're really hard on ourselves. And she's like, but I still had a panic attack, right? I still had that struggle. Yes, yes. But, recognizing the growth and having her husband be able to say, that was awesome. But so sometimes, it's that we practice that in the safety with others,
Mm.
and before we're able to engage in that on our own. But yeah, to help
Yeah, yeah.
provide that and trust themselves to be able to, to calm and ground themselves in that moment. And, then they, really be able to do the work that they need to be able to process through that trauma to where, hopefully in the future, it won't have the power to hijack them like it has in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you mentioned, that community aspect of it. We talk about that a lot
Mhm.
here at MyCounselor.Online, about the importance of community and communicating, what you're feeling to others and just not isolating yourself in those depressive feelings, those traumatic, triggers, just not isolating yourself and shaming yourself. We talk about that a lot. And I think that, you just touched on it again, just the importance of, letting people in even to the messy, messy spots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, awesome. Well, wow, that's so good. And we're going to move on to the last, segment of our My Counselor Live episode today. We get questions sent in throughout the week on the live, and we love getting to answer your questions and getting to, give you the answers that you're searching for, that you've been searching for. And so this is always a really exciting part where you guys get to be a part of the show, where you guys get to ask questions and speak into what we talk about. So I want to just start by asking a question that was submitted online. Guys, if you go to MyCounselor.Online/ask, you can always submit a question to us during the week or inbox them to us at any time, and we will add them to the list to ask in a future episode. But this question was asked online on our website, and this person said, I've been married for 6 years, yet have never, both before marriage and during it, been interested in sex. Is asexuality a real thing?
Mm. I think how I would approach that client is to just really get more curious about, what that means to her. Like, if you're putting yourself in that category, what does that mean? And so kind of just opening up really some curiosity around her experiences growing up, because our gender, we are born sexual because we are born either male or female, right? And so how our genders are nurtured growing up is really does impact how we view sex and our sexuality throughout the lifespan. And
Yeah,
so
and I mean that goes for both guys and girls. Yeah.
absolutely. And so, I would really want to help her get curious around just so she's seeing it as she has zero desire or zero, she's not noticing arousal or not noticing desire or anything. And so to just kind of get curious around, she might not be absent of it. It might be something, from her past experience that we could uncover through being able to talk about it and kind of really get curious around, affection and, kind of what was modeled to her as a child, if she was within the church, what was spoken to her around the spiritual element of it. So just kind of how she, if she was around, kids her own age, or if there was trauma involved, or kids her own age that was, experimenting, and like how she was impacted by that, whether through exposure to conversation or, pornography or whatever. So I just really want to get curious with her around that. And so I would love to see her to reach out to, therapists to be able to just kind of process that, because God did design her. God designed her to be able to enjoy sex. He designed her female. We have, a part that's specifically designed in us for no other purpose. Our clitoris serves no other purpose besides sexual pleasure. Mm-hmm. And so, God designed male and female both to be able to enjoy our sexuality. And so for her, if she's noticing that she's not sexual, let's figure that out. Let's lean into figuring out why that is.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, we definitely encourage, you, if you're watching this, to, reach out and talk to somebody, or, maybe you didn't ask this question, but you are experiencing something similar. You can always reach out and talk with a therapist, because I agree absolutely, Lacey, that this is just something that you shouldn't have to walk through alone. I think that there could be so much shame that's like associated with that kind of feeling, when you feel like sex is supposed to be pleasurable. Why am I not enjoying it? I think that there's so much shame that you can kind of carry and isolate yourself in if you're not talking about it.
Yeah. And I think another huge piece to this is that female sexuality is just really not, it's not talked about. It's not, and it's almost like females are supposed to fit the mold to what we know to be true about male sexuality and what arouses men, or like what men feel about sex. Well, that is so different from, and so if she's comparing herself to her spouse and how what arouses him or things like that, she's going to feel like that is, I say this all the time to my husbands, I'm like, your wife can walk in front of you naked and you'd be like ready to go. But if you walk in front of your wife naked, she might not look up from her book, because there's just certain gender differences that are around desire and around arousal. And, I've come across so many wives, so many women that I've worked with that, they don't really truly understand how their body works, because our parts are on the inside. Male sexual parts are on their outside, and they're very familiar with them from, little on up. But women we don't have that. We have to actually, have a hand mirror available to be able to kind of check out our parts. And so that's just not nurtured. It's not valued, I don't think. And so, or if female sexuality is talked about, it's talked about in a negative way. And so there's this piece too that could be really confusing. But I would just really encourage this, this woman with this question to just really, kind of get curious. And I love that, that she's grappling with that.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, let's move on to this last question before we finish up, Lacey. This person said, what is the best way to bring up and discuss what sex is with my kids?
Yeah. I think that, the answer to that is to start really, really young. And the thing of it is there are so many great resources out there. So if we start really young talking to our kids about, their gender and their parts and, how to feel about them and increase that on the stages, your kids are going to be comfortable, talking to you about, about all of these things. And so, and you don't have to know it all to be able to teach your kids. And a lot of times I've given specific resources to parents and they're like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have had this education. I'm so glad to be providing this with my kids, and I'm learning so much. That's what I hear from my parents. And sometimes I'm learning so much as I'm walking my kids through this. But so the resources that I recommend are God's Design for Sex. And would be the first one. So from 3 to 5, this is book 1, and it's the story of me. And then we have Before I Was Born, ages 5 to 8. And then ages 8 to 12, What's the Big Deal? And we move into, facing the facts. And then they also do have a parent handbook. So, how and when. So the thing of it is you don't have to do this all on your own. There are so many good, Christian resources out there. Another one, as far as like really talking to your kids and preparing them for like the possibility of, seeing pornography or whatever. And so something like Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior. And then, moving on up to the same thing, but just in a more because our kids have devices in their hands all the time, especially right now with the pandemic. Yeah. Like our kids are if they're virtually learning, they have a device or a computer out there in their fingertips all the time. And so,
well, I even wonder, with everything going on, how things are going to maybe even shift and change, and there will never be a time where, people like don't have their phones out or don't have, the ability to do virtual things just because of the way that the world is right now.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so, and you can purchase all these products on Amazon. They're really easy to find, right? And so, you're not alone in this. People have paved the way. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to rediscover how and when. It's, these are safe, trusted resources to be able to know when and how to talk to your kids about their sexuality. And that will be a very, very valuable part of their life. And if you begin talking about this, with your kids when they're young, they're going to be more likely when they're older and actually have questions, that could be, really important decisions that they might be making. They're more likely going to become, they'll more likely come to you because you've desensitized, these conversations. You've desensitized them to these conversations, and so because studies show that kids would way rather talk to their parents about issues around sex, but they're never going to say that.
Yeah.
They're never going to admit to that, but they would way rather learn these things from their parents than from anybody else.
Yeah. No,
So.
that's really helpful. I think it would be interesting, I don't have kids yet, but as someone who maybe, didn't, get talked to about sex other than honestly, being given a book, but not really having any conversation afterwards, just kind of, here's a book, learn about it, and I think it would be really interesting for me as a mom someday to talk to my kids about sex and you carry with you what you grew up with. And so it would be such a change for me to kind of break the mold in what I grew up with, what my parents grew up with, and actually talk about it. And I think there's a lot of people, especially in the church, a lot of parents that have pretty similar stories.
But you really do have to break through that discomfort. It's not going to be comfortable, right? Most of the things that, are really good for us and have a really good outcome, they're hard. They require, diligence and us moving through a little bit of fear to do them. And so it's the same thing, in regards to, really educating your kids about sex. And but the benefits to them really can be priceless in that, as far as, that you might help prevent them from struggling in their, sexually within their marriage one day, or you might be able to help them say no or know their boundaries well, just from this education, or recognize when somebody is touching them inappropriately and be able to speak out because you've opened the door already for that. And so just so many valuable things that can come from, really helping your child, embrace and understand their gender, and then understand their sexuality as it grows through childhood and adolescence.
Yeah. Awesome. Sweet. Well, thank you so much for answering that one, Lacey. And thank you just for spending the last hour with us and just giving up your time and just sharing your wisdom with us. I think that you bring so much to this team with your experience in ministry and just your heart for what you do and your passion for the church and for relationships and healthy relationships, seeing them thrive. And I love it. And I'm so happy that we got to have you here. You guys, thank you so much for joining us, whether, you're watching it live, watching the replay. We're happy that you could be here. And, I hope that something in this episode was able to just really speak to your heart. And as always, you can always schedule some counseling with one of our counselors or Lacey. Reach out. We would love to talk with you and answer more questions, even, more personally, if that's something that you're wanting to do. But we will be back next week for another episode of My Counselor Live. And so Lacey, thank you so much for joining us today.
I've had a great time, Tori. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Bye, guys. See you next week.